West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
His opponent, his chief opponent, Ron DeSantis, is kind of kicking off his tour, the Florida governor now, calling the Great American Comeback Tour. He'll start today in Iowa. In an interview yesterday on Fox, DeSantis was asked for the rationale for his campaign. Why is he running? Why should people look at him, take a vote for him over Donald Trump? Here's what he said.
Why is right now the time for Ron DeSantis to run for president?
Because everyone knows if I'm the nominee, I will beat Biden and I will serve 2 terms and I will be able to destroy leftism in this country and leave woke ideology on the dustbin of history.
So there it is in a nutshell, Joe. He says he can beat Joe Biden, suggesting that Donald Trump can't. He'll serve 2 terms. Donald Trump can. He's already served 1. And then just on the issues, on the shining city on a hill, the morning in America, it is defeat woke ideology.
I mean, Gene Robinson, we are so far from Ronald Reagan, that America is a city shining brightly on the hill for all the world to see, the last great. And a serious point here, too, because, actually, let me play you this clip, because this is when I just started thinking, we used to have a football coach that would say, you boys are majoring in minors. Focus on the big things. This is what Ron DeSantis is doing. He's majoring on the minors, on things that may get a small sliver of the population, but it's not like Reagan. Reagan would say things that maybe 50% of Americans agreed with, but it'd say it in a way that 90% of Americans would go, yeah, this guy's on to something. Reagan was always trying to reach out. It's maybe why he won 49 states and why Republicans under Donald Trump keep losing election. But Ron DeSantis, for some weird reason, I don't get it, seems to be following that path. And moments later in that interview, he was asked whether he could win Iowa. This is what he had to say.
We obviously have a lot in common with Iowa in terms of what Florida's done and what they've done under Governor Kim Reynolds. And I think the groundswell of support has been really, really strong. And, we're going to press the case. I mean, they had mentioned there may be some differences with me and Donald Trump. And I think that those differences redound to my benefit in a place like Iowa. I mean, for example, he's taken the side of Disney in our fight down here in Florida. I'm standing for parents. I'm standing for children. And I think a multi-billion-dollar company that sexualizes children is not consistent with the values of Florida or the values of a place like Iowa.
Disney sexual. Ron DeSantis decides that he's going to launch his campaign by talking about how the Magic Kingdom sexualizes children. This is something that, again, we've all grown up with Disney. You and I, Gene, when we were young, would see the wonderful world of Disney every Sunday night. It's continued through, and And, it's not like things got crazy. My kids growing up, I've seen The Lion King like 87 times, and The Little Mermaid and all of these other shows. It hasn't radically changed or shifted. What's happened is, for some reason, this has become this weird sort of cottage industry deal. And I guess maybe people get ratings doing this. Maybe they make money. Maybe people listen to their podcast by bashing Disney. But I can tell you, as somebody that knows a little bit about Florida, this doesn't even sell in Florida. I mean, Disney is loved, but this
Joe, he got married there.
He got married there.
It's a happy place.
The happiest place on earth, I think, is what all those quarterbacks from Super Bowl say. It's just, again, Gene, my bigger point is this. They emphasize these really small things that gin up a small part of the base, instead of being like Reagan, looking over the horizon and saying, how do I unite Americans and in the process win 49 states?
Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, Joe, you and I, we both spent a lot of time in Iowa. We both know that you're walking down the street and you ask voters, what's on your mind? What are you thinking? Republican voters, and they say that Disney. I hate Disney. I wish somebody would go after Disney. I mean, it's just ridiculous. No, it's ridiculous. This is the centerpiece of. I can't believe that he mentions that as part of his argument why he should be the Republican nominee, let alone the President of the United States. Again, I don't. This is Ahab-like. This pursuit of Disney. It can't be a really winning issue for him, I think. But all he's got apparently is I'm against woke ideology, and that's gonna touch a chord among the base, among the hardcore base. But boy, that is a tough sell if you want to be president of the United States, because you've got a few more things to worry about other than pronouns. You've got a lot of other stuff to do.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Lemire, the guy can talk. He can express himself. He's intelligent, and yet he always, again, goes down to the lowest common denominator. I'm not really sure, but this anti-woke crusade. You notice Tim Scott did something, I think, pretty smart in his announcement. He never talked about woke. He talked about things he disagreed with that some people might say, oh, well, that's woke or this, that. But all this talk, it's at this point, it's ground noise. When you go, and Florida's where woke goes to die. Like, this is like Donald Trump and like being Fat Elvis and like repeating everything that he did in 2016. And he's like Elvis in 1977. He's repeating the same act over and over again. And again, if you want to be new and you want to be different and you want to take your party in a winning direction, then don't go to the lowest common denominator. Again, it just doesn't make sense.
Or to paraphrase the criticism that was levied against Rudy Giuliani during his campaign, DeSantis is noun, verb, woke. That's it. It's all it is. And he's talking to us this small piece of the electorate, sort of the Fox News primary. And yeah, maybe right now he'll score some points in Florida. He could score some points among diehard conservatives in some of the early states. But even Disney's not perceived among Republicans as this unambiguous win. There's a lot of Republicans who are like, this is a major business here, a beloved American institution. You just lost a lot of jobs for your state because of this. So he's opened himself up to those sort of attacks too. And it reinforces some concerns that the donor class has started to have about DeSantis. And look, he raised a lot of money in his first day, no doubt, but that was supposed to be one of his major advantages. He was going to be the palatable Republican to those who were tired of Donald Trump. But he's really boxed himself in a lot of extreme positions. And now, look, he hits the road today. It begins, Joe and Mika. He makes his first stop out in Iowa. He's going to hit a couple of these early battleground states, his early primary states, and we will see what sort of retail politician he proves to be, because to this point, the reviews have been pretty unfavorable, that he's had trouble connecting with voters, connecting with donors, connecting with supporters, and he's going to have to show that he has the ability to be charismatic, but also to fashion an argument that separates himself from Trump, who right now has definitely got the better of their matchup.
Joe, to your point about majoring in minors, most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, hear him say that Disney is sexualizing children and just go, what is he even talking about? Yeah. What is the story behind? What does that even mean? Most of them were going out to see Disney's The Little Mermaid for $150 million it made at the box office or whatever it was this weekend. So you have to sort of picture he's running to be president of the United States. If he's standing on a debate stage with Joe Biden and he starts talking about Disney sexualizing young children, does that turn on voters in the suburbs of Atlanta and Philadelphia and Milwaukee? Is that something that they're concerned about or that they even understand? We'll see. I get it. This is a primary. He's trying to win a primary first, but he's got a lot of stuff, including the 6-week abortion ban, that he's going to have to unwind if he becomes the nominee, and that's going to be very difficult to do.
Yeah. It's so crazy. What did we hear repeatedly in the summer of 2022? What we heard was the biggest issues are inflation, jobs, the southern border. You go down the list, gas prices. You go down the list. These issues, these economic issues, and Republicans said Democrats won't talk about them. And then they go into the 2022 election, and they're talking about these issues again that a small number of Americans care about. And they get absolutely walloped at the polls in 22. Mika, I think I don't agree with the conventional wisdom about Ron DeSantis. I think right now he's even money. And I know a lot of people would laugh at that. I think Ron DeSantis right now is even money to be the next Republican nominee for president. I do think that if he learns how to get out of his way, and we're still 9 months off from elections, he could beat Donald Trump because he is so much more competent than Donald Trump, and he's supposed to come without the baggage that Donald Trump has. As he said in his press conference, he doesn't know a whole lot about paying off porn stars, so he can't really answer those type of questions.
It is Tuesday, the 30th of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Hi, how are you? Had a long weekend, didn't we? Lots of news that occurred, and yes, yesterday turned into an all-clip show, so sorry about that, but that's the way it went. It was a holiday, and I just decided at the last minute that's what we'll do. And I don't know if it took any less time than what it would have taken just to do the show as I normally do it, but there you go. Anyway, what do we have in store for you today? We have quite a bit, and we'll get into it in just a moment as we finish up our morning rant. And do we have one? Well, maybe just an update on the local news about the anti-LGBTQ. They're calling him a local business owner, okay? He's a tree trimmer. So just get that out there. Right? Sort of like the equivalent of somebody who's, bucks wood and sells, firewood unbucked. And then he'll buck it for a fee. And then they'll load it up into a pickup truck that's barely running and bring it to you. Sometimes you have to go get it yourself. I'm just saying. Local business owner who went on to some people who have lived here for quite a few years, actually. And when I say quite a few, like more than 5. I think, I take that back. They moved here because they were displaced. Their house in Phoenix, Oregon, burned down in one of the many wildfires we have around here on a regular basis. And moved here. And have been here since then. So that's actually been, 3 or 4 years. So, not like just recent arrivals. But they were flying an LGBTQ flag, apparently, in their front yard. I think a rainbow flag. They had a rainbow type colors of a windsock and a flag, and oh my. That fellow had to come on to the property and let them know how he felt and why did they think they could get away with this in a conservative town. And this guy has defenders. But don't call them bigots and racists. Oh, no. And they're gaslighting about what occurred when a Black Lives Matter. I don't know how she got aligned with Black Lives Matter. She wasn't really aligned with Black Lives Matter. She ran a group of an outreach group, and she was invited by our city council to give a presentation on our Thursday workshop on racism in Southern Oregon and racism generally, systemic racism. And the then police chief took umbrage with that and essentially intimidated her so badly during the workshop, she cut the presentation short and hightailed it out of there. Now, I should note that this police chief had come from a previous, I believe it was Talent, or maybe it was Phoenix. But anyway, he was the police chief at this other little town. And the council members there just happened to be a council member from Berkeley that I knew and knew of her work. And yeah, she happens to be lesbian. Isn't that terrible? But they had so many problems in that town between the city council, and he was just, against any leftists, these leftists, these commies, taking over our town, and, not, I don't know, taking note of how, the fascists have been working very hard to take over what we call America. They think fascism is America. No. But anyway, he'd already had a bit of some baggage dealing with, I don't know, that or this and all of it in between. So when he ran off, the black lady who came to give a presentation on racism in our town invited we members, we like to, maybe I would call us the more reasonable members of our town, decided, well, that was a terrible thing for her to go through. Why don't we have a picnic at Palmerton Arboretum Park, and she can give her presentation there, and we'll invite more members of the community, and they can have a picnic, and we'll have a good old time. Well, the police chief on his own contacted his friends, and I don't know, it sounded to me a little bit like how the Klan worked back in the day in this area. Yeah, sundown town Southern Oregon is not just hyperbole, it is a fact from back in the day. And I'll say, up into the mid-'70s, when I was playing with Cottonmouth, we would not play in Grants Pass because it was still a sundown town. And we boycotted those. Because our audience was, shall we say, multidimensional, multicultural. I don't know, gender ambivalent, as they used to say back in the day. Anyway, so he called all of his friends, and they came and pretty much protested that they're not going to allow this to happen in a city-owned park or a city-run park. So then we decided, hell, we'll just have a picnic at City Hall. And on the day that was to occur, the police chief called his friends, and 150 to 200 of his armed friends. And now I got to tell you, there's some gaslighting going on about, we weren't armed. I go, there's photographs of you from all sorts of different press journals and press outlets showing that you guys carry your guns the way you normally do around here for everybody to see so they can see who is the boss. Anyway, so that was rather intimidating, and we decided for the safety of this lady and her friends, we're not going to have that picnic at City Hall. We did get a presentation, but we went to her facility to get that. Only a few showed up, as it was meant to be. Now, I should add that that particular police chief no longer is a police chief in this town, and he was let go shortly after all of those events occurred. Because it is rather, shall we say, untoward to call up 150 to 200 of your armed friends to stand across the street from City Hall and intimidate people for having a picnic because they were black. And they have friends. So when this guy went onto these residents' property and said, how do you think you can get away with this in a conservative town? That's what that means. If you don't toe the line, you're going to get in trouble. Now, this is a behavior we see endemic across the political spectrum now, where we Democratic voters might say that that particular business or that particular corporation is, funding slave labor and kill all the gay laws in Uganda. So we will boycott their wares and not buy them. Where's MAGA? As personified by this fellow who went onto these people's property and complained about their rainbow flag. That attitude is that we will identify, any establishment and use them as a talisman to wrap around the necks of those leftists. And what we will do is that we will take over that store, destroy merchandise, intimidate the people inside so that they cannot buy what we don't like. There's a big difference there. That's not normal. Well, we had to do it because those damn leftists were doing their boycotts, so we have to go in there and destroy merchandise. Okay. Which brings me to another point. It is not demeaning of the Holocaust and diminishing the Nazis of the old days by supposedly comparing what's going on to the Nazis back then. Because to compare what is going on now to the Nazis who exterminated 6 million Jews and more of their, quote, fellow travelers, takes away the importance of what the Holocaust is. And I maintain I understand that, but we're not comparing what's going on now to the Nazis that did that. We're comparing them to the Nazis before the Enabling Acts. What they did to get the Enabling Acts enabled so they could become the Nazis that exterminated 6 million and more. When you got a DeSantis saying he's going to destroy leftism and woke ideology. And this is the guy who argued in his first book that it's hard to find now online because they've scrubbed it. This is a guy who said, hey, the Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was about the heavy-handed government of the North coming down and imposing their rules and laws to destroy our property rights. He wasn't talking about the land. He was talking about the chattel. The slave population was property. His argument is that you can't call them human beings, people. They were property, so they fell under a different aegis, a different law. And the heavy hand of the North came down and said that we can't treat them like chattel. And we're still fighting that now. This is the guy who says he wants to get rid of woke ideology. This is the guy who says he wants to destroy leftism. They are eliminationists. And if we don't punch the Nazis now, they will destroy us later. I don't want them to become the Nazis that exterminated 6 million. I want to stop them before we get to that. And it's not diminishing what happened in the Holocaust. Once again, we're comparing what went on before the enabling acts that allowed the enabling acts to be enabled. Okay, got that off my chest. Happy Memorial Day after that day. Okay, what do we have in store for you? Actually curated for your Tuesday morning pleasure, or whenever you may be listening to this. Well, as we start here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the Nevada legislature blocked the Republican governor approving guns to those convicted of hate crimes after being released from prison. Okay, that's great. The Texas impeachment trial of Ken Paxton is to begin no later than August 28th. And it is not only rising oceans threatening New York City, the metropolis is also sinking. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Russia issued an arrest warrant for Lindsey Graham over his Ukraine comments. And I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't care if Lindsey Graham is on the other side of the aisle. Russia making a hit on one of our people, no matter who they are, will pay a price. And I'll say this about MAGA. They would not bestow that kind of benevolence on any of us. And finishing up in the Bistro Cafe, a minority religious community following the teachings of a 14th century Indian guru are stepping into the public eye to advocate making California the first state in the nation to outlaw caste bias. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. It really does help. Please do. If you would like to become, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Co's, and that's where you can find, if you go to my social media feed, you'll find the links to the show notes and links diary, and then you can read the actual articles in their totality. Yes, you can. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, such as it is, you can do so at Cookbook West, and please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of Raw Story by Sarah K. Burris. The Nevada Independent reported yesterday, Monday, that the state Senate passed a veto override of Governor Joe Lombardo, who blocked a set of gun safety laws that would stop those convicted of a hate crime in the last 10 years from getting a gun. There were 3 Democrat-proposed gun control measures, the report explained, and the GOP governor vetoed them all. I will not support legislation that infringes on the constitutional rights of Nevadans, Lombardo said in a release last Wednesday, obviously written by the NRA. As I stated in my letters, much of the legislation I vetoed is in direct conflict with legal precedent and established constitutional protections. Therefore, I cannot support them. The other gun legislation would criminalize bringing a gun within 100 feet of an election site. Oh, got to get rid of that. And a measure that would raise the legal age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle and shotgun to 21. That bill also sought to close legal loopholes that allow for so-called ghost guns. During the spring session, Democratic-led state legislatures have taken steps to pass gun safety legislation, overwhelmingly supported by voters in the state. In Colorado, a member attempted to pass an assault weapons ban, but the Judiciary Committee voted it down 6-7. Illinois passed and the governor signed into a law that would make it illegal for anyone to knowingly possess an assault weapon, 50 caliber rifle, or 50 caliber cartridge 30 days after the law is signed. And it also allows a carve-out for any weapon registered with the Illinois State Police. Washington State bans 60 different kinds of weapons and kits that can build such weapons or enhance legal guns. Assemblywoman Sandra Jaragai, Democrat, lamented she desperately wishes Lombardo would choose the lives of Nevada people over crass partisanship. Jay Weber and Acacia Coronado of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A historic impeachment trial in Texas to determine whether Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton should be permanently removed from office will begin no later than August in the state Senate, where the jury that would determine his future could include his wife, Senator Angela Paxton. Setting a schedule was one of the last orders of business lawmakers took yesterday, Monday, during an acrimonious end to this year's legislative session in Texas, where the impeachment laid bare fractures in America's biggest red state beyond whether Republicans will oust one of the GOP's conservative legal stars. It drags Republicans, who have for years pushed fast-changing Texas farther to the right, into a summer of unfinished business and soured feelings that are likely to spill into the 2024 elections. The stakes are also raised for Governor Greg Abbott, who couldn't get his full agenda through the GOP-controlled legislature on time. He almost immediately called lawmakers back to work for the first of several special sessions in the coming months. His announcement made no mention of Paxton, who Abbott has remained silent on since the impeachment proceedings began last week. At the center of the conflict in the Texas Capitol is Paxton, who the GOP-controlled House overwhelmingly impeached this weekend on charges that included bribery and misuse of office following nearly a decade of scandal and criminal accusations that have dogged the state's top lawyer. He is suspended from office pending trial in the state Senate, which set a start date of no later than August 28th. Calvin of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. If rising oceans are not enough to worry about, add this to the risks New York City faces. The metropolis is slowly sinking under the weight of its own skyscrapers, homes, asphalt, and humanity itself. New research estimates the city's landmass is sinking at an average rate of 1 to 2 millimeters per year, something referred to as subsidence. That natural process happens everywhere as ground is compressed, but the study published this month in the journal Earth's Future sought to estimate how the massive weight of the city itself is hurrying things along. More than 1 million buildings are spread across the city's 5 boroughs. The research team calculated that all those structures add up to about 1.7 trillion tons of concrete, metal, and glass, about the mass of 4,700 Empire State Buildings pressing down on the earth. The rate of compression varies throughout the city. Midtown Manhattan skyscrapers are largely built on rock, which compresses very little, while some parts of Brooklyn, Queens, and downtown Manhattan are on looser soil and sinking faster, the study revealed. While the process is slow, lead researcher Tom Parsons of the U.S. Geological Survey said parts of the city will eventually be underwater. It's inevitable. The ground is going down and the water's coming up. At some point, those two levels will meet. But no need to invest in life preservers just yet, Parsons assured. The study merely notes buildings themselves are contributing, albeit incrementally, to the shifting landscape, he said. Parsons and his team of researchers reached their conclusions using satellite imaging, data modeling, and a lot of mathematical assumptions. All right, you can read the rest of the article, and they take note of other cities that are sinking as well, like Venice. Not just the oceans rising there either, unfortunately. All right, let us now get... Oh, yes, you can find this article by going to the show notes and links here at Daily Kos, so do that. All right, let us then go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Science Quickly, a podcast from Scientific American. I'm Stefano Montali. If I asked you to visualize, say, Harry Potter, you'd probably have no problem picturing him in your mind. a teenage wizard with black hair, glasses, a thunderbolt-shaped scar on his forehead, and a wand in his hand. It would almost be as if you were pulling up a photograph in your head. This ability to visualize is often called the mind's eye, and most people would say it's as inherent as breathing. But it turns out that's not quite true. Estimates say about 1% of the population live with an extreme form of a condition called aphantasia. Those who have it can't visualize anything in their head.
So when they try and imagine, think about what an apple looks like, it's just nothing. It's black on black. For example, when I think about an apple, I can capture a conscious experience of an apple. I can see the stem, I can see a leaf, I can see a drop of water on there. It's not like holding an apple in my hand, but I have an experience of an apple.
Joel Pearson is a professor of cognitive neuroscience and director of the Future Minds Lab at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He's been studying mental imagery, including in the context of aphantasia and cognition, since 2008. One of the main questions, he says, has always been finding a way to accurately measure it.
Back then, almost no one, there was only a few people studying visual imagery because it was so hard to measure, right? It was just questionnaires and maybe an interview. The problem with questionnaires is that you and me could both imagine an apple and our imagery could be exactly the same, but I might rate it a 4 and you might rate it a 1, right? Even though we consciously, internally experience the exact same thing, or vice versa. Maybe we have totally different imagery and both rate it as 2. So that's kind of the inherent problem of metacognition when it comes to questionnaires. So a lot of what we do at Future Minds Lab is trying to develop new ways of measuring the mind, objective, reliable ways, like a microscope for the mind or a blood test to measure the mind.
One of the lab's experiments explored how a lack of mental imagery affects the way people with aphantasia respond in a hypothetical stressful situation.
We did another experiment, which was having people come into a dark room and read these scary stories on the screen. We found that people with imagery, when we measure their skin conductance response, get this nice escalating response during the story. Those with aphantasia get sort of a flatlining, bumpy. Whereas if we show both those group scary images on the screen, both groups go up. So when it's perceptual, no real difference. When it's words on the screen, a role for mental imagery, there's a clear difference.
Building on this research, Pearson and his team then recruited people with aphantasia from the Sydney, Australia area to come to the lab for another experiment. This time, he asked the participants to imagine a dark object and then a light one.
Your pupil contracts when you're imagining the bright thing, just like it does if I look up at the light. People with imagery, the pupil is different in the light condition. No imagery with aphantasia. There's no real difference there.
For a person to be able to volunteer for this type of experiment, they first have to realize that they have aphantasia. But how do you know that you can't visualize if you don't even know that other people can? Quite often, Pearson says the epiphany takes place in a meditation class.
The teacher will be saying, now picture this and picture that, and I'll be getting more and more frustrated saying, they keep saying that. What do they mean? I can't picture that. I compare it to people discovering they're colorblind. They just don't know what they're missing until someone describes somehow the vivid experience of color. Then they go, oh, wait, what?
On a brighter note, though, there are many successful creative people that live with the condition. Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull is one. Glenn Keane, a character animator behind films such as The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, is another. So is there a connection between imagery, aphantasia, and creativity?
I had lots of emails from people saying, oh my God, I've realized I have aphantasia. That's why I'm not creative. In fact, we're running a creativity study now here in Future Minds. And again, the data does not support any difference in creativity measures for those with aphantasia. So even though people tend to sort of have some intuition, they think that there should be a lack of creativity in aphantasia, the data just doesn't support that so far.
Living without mental imagery might seem like a disadvantage, but Pearson says there are benefits as well, especially in terms of those living with anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD.
All the data we have so far suggests that the more vivid your imagery is, the more prone you are to develop PTSD after a trauma. Things around anxiety are going to be different and less without imagery.
But what about good memories? Do they stick around? Pearson says yes, just in a bit of a different way.
That can take on a number of different semantics, ideas, concepts, spatial locations, emotions, and sometimes different senses. You can break aphantasia up into multisensory aphantasia, so it's blind across all the senses, or pure visual aphantasia. So why people's lifelong memories have less details if they have aphantasia, they're still there. It's not catastrophic. The memories aren't lost.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's Science Quickly, I'm Stefano Montali.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Do mass protests matter anymore? Even when large numbers turn out with a high level of outrage directed at abusive corporate or governmental elites, the powers that be usually just hunker down and wait for the fury to pass. But the one form of protest that actually gets to even the most aloof elite is cultural caricature. In recent decades, the creative deployment of giant puppets, satirical songs, pop-up parodies, and other forms of social mockery has pierced the ego shields of haughty corporate chieftains and puffed-up politicos. They ignore angry speeches, but public ridicule stings them personally, energizing the larger community. Consider how common household utensils can rally the people's discontent, rattle the establishment, and deliver a message of revolutionary protest. In recent years, mass rebellions armed with nothing but kitchenware have noisily made their points in such disparate places as Chile and Iceland. And today, the people of France are bedeviling their country's aristocratic wannabe, President Emmanuel Macron, with a ceaseless mass clanging of skillets, saucepans, spoons, and other plebeian cookware brought from their French kitchens into the streets of every region. They are protesting the president's imperious decision to undercut their pensions, as well as his tone-deaf refusal even to hear their complaints. So their voice has become the incessant banging of pots. Now, Macron can't go anywhere without being greeted and often drowned out by the cacophony of casserolade, the saucepan movement. The protest is driving Macron crazy, which seems to be a very short ride for him. Clearly irritated by the commoner's cleverness, his government is now using anti-terrorism laws to ban, quote, the use of portable sound devices in protests. This is Jim Hightower saying the crazier he gets about pots and pans, the louder people laugh at their leader.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day that came to be known as the Republic Steel Massacre, or the Memorial Day Massacre in Chicago, Illinois. Workers had gathered to rally for a union at the Republic Steel plant. The crowd included men, women, and children, and began with a festive holiday atmosphere. But soon the festivity gave way to horror as police opened fire, shooting indiscriminately into the crowd of workers. 10 workers were slain, many others were injured. The violence was caught by a film camera, which captured chilling scenes of policemen beating workers with clubs as they tried to flee the violence. One of those workers was a woman by the name of Guadalupe Marshall. Lupe had come to the United States from Mexico in 1917. At the time of the strike, she was working for the famed Chicago Hull House, researching the conditions of Mexican workers in the city. During the massacre, she was wounded in the head. She was then shoved into a patrol wagon, where she tried to help other wounded people. One of the wounded died in her arms. Later, she testified before the U.S. Senate Committee of Education and Labor about what she saw that day. She said, quote, As we were walking along to the patrol wagon, I noticed men lying all over the field. Some of them were motionless, some were groaning, but nearly all of those that were lying down had their heads covered with blood, and their clothing was stained with blood. The Senate committee helped expose what happened that bloody day in Chicago. The local newspaper blamed the violence on the workers, and the film of the event was suppressed by the city.
Republic's bloody ground, the 30th of May. Oh, brothers, lift your voices high for them that died that day. The men who make our country steel, the toilers in the mill. They said in union.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 66 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 80. Sunshine and a few clouds throughout the day, with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. A few passing clouds overnight with lows in the upper 40s. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then some clouds in the morning will give way to mainly sunny skies in the afternoon, but highs will only be in the mid-70s. We're freezing now. Yes. No, we're not. But anyway, a bit of a temperature drop, and then we'll inch back up to, the 80s and low 90s as we get along in the week to next week. Grass pollen is rated very high here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 21 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.97 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 70%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 61 degrees and mostly cloudy. Paris is 74 and sunny. Rome is 75 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 76 and fair. Kabul is 61 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 88 and fair. Tokyo is 70 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 48 and clear. San Francisco, California is 58 and cloudy. And New York, New York is 65 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. The Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. Russia's Interior Ministry yesterday, Monday, issued an arrest warrant for U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham following his comments related to the fighting in Ukraine. In an edited video of his meeting on Friday with Ukrainian President Zelensky that was released by Zelensky's office, Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, noted that the Russians are dying and described the U.S. military assistance to the country as the best money we've ever spent. Well, Graham appeared to have made the remarks in different parts of the conversation. The short video by Ukraine's presidential office puts them next to each other, causing outrage in Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Peskov, commented on Sunday, by saying that it's hard to imagine a greater shame for the country than having such senators. Oh, really? The investigative committee, the country's top criminal investigation agency, has moved to open a criminal inquiry against Graham, and the Interior Ministry followed up by issuing a warrant for his arrest, as indicated Monday by its official record of wanted criminal suspects. Graham is among more than 200 U.S. members of Congress whom Moscow banned last year from entering Russia. Graham commented on Twitter saying that to know that my commitment to Ukraine has drawn the ire of Putin's regime brings me immense joy. I will continue to stand with and for Ukraine's freedom until every Russian soldier is expelled from Ukrainian territory, he tweeted. I will wear the arrest warrant issued by Putin's corrupt and immoral government as a badge of honor.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Deepa Barath of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. In California, members of an under-the-radar minority religious community are stepping into the public eye to advocate for making the state the first in the nation to outlaw caste bias. They are the Ravidasya, followers of Ravidas, a 14th century Indian guru who preached caste and class equality. There are about 20,000 members of the community in California, most of them in the Central Valley. Guru Ravidas belonged to the lowest rung of the caste system, formerly considered untouchable and also known as a Dalit, which means broken in Hindi. Today, many Ravadisya members share that caste identity, but they are hesitant to make that widely known, fearing repercussions for being exposed to the larger community as lower caste. Members of the Fresno Ravidasya community say publicly championing the anti-caste bias legislation is worth the risk, noting that fighting for equality is part of their history and their spiritual DNA. The faith itself emerged in response to the societal exclusion of the lowest caste members, including persistent roadblocks to land ownership, said Ronki Ram, professor of political science at Punjab University in Chandigarh, India. Caste-based discrimination was outlawed in India in 1947. Ravidas was an Indian guru, mystic, and poet who was one of the most renowned figures in the North Indian Bhakti movement, which placed love and devotion to God above all and preached against the caste system. Ravidas was born in the 14th century in a village near Varanasi, India, to a family of cobblers and tanners who belonged to the then untouchable or leather-working caste known as Chamars. The Guru Granth Sahib, which is the sacred text of Sikhism, bears 40 verses or shabads of Ravi Das. The Ravidasiya community's relation with Sikhism is flexible and nuanced, said Sasha Sabharwal, assistant professor of anthropology and Asian studies at Northwestern University. It's not an either-or relationship, she said. It's a much more complex idea of what their faith means for them. Some Ravidasiya temples may be autonomous spaces, but in many cases it's blended or overlapping rather than something entirely independent. There is still a commitment to this larger Sikh project. Sabharwal said the path to unity may lie in making meaningful structural changes. The issue is that often caste is not even acknowledged as a problem, she said. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.